translated into Arab?
The first two novels were translated, this one not yet. I hope it will be translated, but it's a fact that my books are read by more Arabs, of course in Israel, because they are written in Hebrew. It's a fact, it's an absurd, but it's a fact. If I wrote the novel in Arabic, less Arabs would read it, because there are bookstores, and an Arab reader who wants to buy a book, he will go to the Israeli city next to his town and village and buy a book in Hebrew.
That's quite understandable.
Yes.
But the protagonist, isn't he somehow an anti-hero, an anti-protagonist? He is, profession-wise, he's successful, but in his personality and in the development of his character, he remains not only jealous but also suspicious, and he feels he has a very low self-esteem when it comes to books, something you mentioned just before.
Yes.
He comes across the name of Egon Schiele, and he would not be able to say who this guy was. Yes. And then he goes and Googles him on the internet and finds out who this man was, an artist.
Yes.
Is there somehow an average personality? Also because you give him no name.
Average personality?
In the sense of an average character, does he represent more than just an individual?
When it comes to culture and knowledge, unfortunately, that's the reality. We don't really have cultural life or a developed cultural life when it comes to this group of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Again, it's rare to find bookstores, not to mention libraries. I live in a Tira is now 25,000 people. I'm not sure that there is a library now even in Tira, and not to talk about cinemas and theater. We live in the margins of the Israeli society. The education system is much more poor than the Israeli one, and so yes, I guess that's the situation. Although the first talk I gave in Hebrew was when, yes, the lawyer feels really embarrassed by the fact that he doesn't know literature, and he says that he feels bad, and that's the reason that he buys used book, because he wants more to know the classics like Tolstoy, and then like his colleagues, like his Jewish colleagues in the court, he wants to know. And I remember the very first talk, I think it was an Ashkenazi Jewish lawyer who stood up and said, you're doing a great mistake if you think that Ashkenazi Jewish lawyers read Tolstoy. So I'm not sure about that. But it was something that I felt when I arrived to the high school. Maybe not because the Jewish kids knew more about art and culture than I did, but everything that I knew when I was 15 and I really wanted to be accepted there, it was primitive. I couldn't really listen to the Arabic music because for them it was really primitive. And when I arrived at the age of 15, I didn't know who even the Beatles were.
I'm sorry. I can imagine that you quite well remember the first time moving into Jerusalem. How was that at the age of 15?
It was a nightmare. It was really. In the first novel I wrote about the first week in the boarding school, like the most difficult week in my life. It was really true until we started to renovate our house. Then it was the most difficult period of my life. But for many years, yes, it was a shock. It was in the 1990. I was 15 years old. It was the first Intifada, and we had only one channel. I looked totally an Arab kid who arrives from Tira, the Arab village. Everything was, of course, more strange, the language, my accent, my clothes. I remember the first thing I was asked by the roommates is, do Arabs have special factories for pants and clothes? And I was so naive. I said, yes, you go to Kalkili and you can buy it if you want. And so everything was difficult, the schnitzel and the puree, and I don't know. But of course, missing home. And I remember very well, it was very difficult, just like the lawyer, that my father took me to Jerusalem, to the boarding school in the first week. The best thing that happened to me during that week is to discover how much holidays Jewish people have. So we just started the new year, and after 1 week we went back home because of Rosh Hashanah holiday, and I was stopped. And the first time that I took a bus in my life, because I'm not sure that there is public transportation when we talk about the Arab-Palestinian community in Israel, till today, I was stopped by a soldier, and I was asked by the age of 15 to get from the bus, and he was searching my suitcase, and I was really terrified. So it was very, very difficult. I didn't want to go back to the school, but my parents.
Did they insist?
Yes, because it's the best. That's the best school in Israel, and they were so happy that I was accepted. My math teacher thought that is the best education that I can get. It was a new project. It's for talented people.
How about the percentage of Arab students they take?
I don't know.
In your class, do you remember?
No. We were two Arabs in the school. Yes, it was just
so quite an exceptional role that you had then.
Yes, and of course there wasn't even not one book in Arabic in the school. It was totally Hebrew, but still for my parents it was like a huge achievement. You were accepted to the talented kids, and I remember very well that my father he told me that after a few months your Hebrew will be perfect, don't worry, everything will be fine, you'll get married. But I remember, and I wrote that in the book, that he said, because I was good in science at that time, and he told me that you have to study with the talented Jewish kids, and you're going to be the first Palestinian to build an atomic bomb. So actually,
really,
for peaceful reasons, of course, but so I was sent to a Jewish boarding school to study with them.
I can also imagine that apart from schnitzel and the pants, with your luggage of the Nakba on your shoulders, it must have been somehow a challenging cultural shock to be taught in a Jewish Hebrew school about the narratives of the Jews.
Yes, to be honest, it was for in many ways it was even more eye-opening to study in a Jewish school. We do belong to the Israeli Ministry of Education. There is the Arab section. In the Arab section till now, there is someone from the security authorities of Israel that have to approve every principal who works in the schools. We do belong to the Israeli system. We don't learn any Palestinian history whatsoever. So all I know about Nakba was not a narrative written by historians. It was personal stories of my grandmother, and the stories that I was really a frightened little boy, but now I'm grown up and still frightened. So I always skipped from my room and listened to her stories. And her stories, I didn't know that it's called Nakba, and I didn't know what's the meaning of Zionism until I get
the catastrophe. That's the story of the Palestinian Arabs who were taken away their land.
Yes, so I listened to the story of the family. There were a lot of battles and fights surrounding Tira. My grandfather. My grandmother told me how my grandfather was killed during the war in 48. My father was born in 47, so was only a few months old. The way that she protected her son, and maybe the saddest part of my grandmother's stories that she kept telling all the time was when she was told that the war is over, and she wanted to go to her fields, her own private family fields, to bring foods for the orphans. That's her story. And then this Israeli soldier told her that you don't have any fields anymore. So it was very. And actually, my grandmother lost her husband in the war, and she worked as a fruit picker. She worked harvesting
the olives and
yes, sometimes in her own private land for the rest of her life. Of course, she managed even to send my father to the Hebrew University in '66, which was rare, but she managed to do that. So I think that this feeling of losing home is very, very deep inside me.
Yes.
Yes, it's to be ready all the time, and sometimes I wonder if I want to deliver that feeling to my kids, because it's and we talk about narratives and we talk about identities. So from one hand, I really want my kids to have a healthier life and to know that the home is a protected place that they can count on. From the other hand, in this situation that the Israeli society is getting more nationalist all the time, the education system in the Israeli schools is very, very nationalist. So again, we don't study that in Arab schools, and I was very lucky because I had in the high school some history teachers. Now they are called the post-Zionist historians, part of them, who dare to talk or give a different opinion. Unfortunately, now it's more difficult. When I used to study in high school, it was a little bit more liberal than today. Yes. According to researchers, unfortunately, in Israel, the young generation is becoming more extreme and more right-wing.
More nationalistic.
Yes, and the education system is becoming more radical also.
But today, as I remember from many visits to Israel, they produced a parallel history book in which both narratives are told: the Palestinian Nakba narrative and the Holocaust narrative of the Israeli society.
No, there is no mention of the Nakba in the Arab inside the Israeli education system.
I know, but there have been groups of historians aiming at producing such history books which contain both perspectives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, even the part of civil studies, Ezrachut. There was a huge story because they mentioned a little bit the discrimination about the Arabs, and the head of the department of civil studies, unfortunately, was just fired from his position because of very small sentences in civic books for high school. Yes, there are always groups of historians who are trying to yes, but it's unfortunately the minority.
Yes. So the lawyer, in order to continue the story, the lawyer remains somehow a character that is within the Jerusalem society.
Yes.
But it seems as if he were looking into this kind of society that he is always an outsider of.
Yes, he's an outsider, and he doesn't feel secure at all. He feels that it doesn't belong to him, or he doesn't belong there.
Daniela started to read from part 2.
Sorry.
It's all right. Doesn't matter. It's just it was the opening of the part that deals with the social worker. That's the second parallel story. And we again have an outsider as a character, as the main protagonist of this, Amir. Amir is, as I understand, a character whose name can belong to both languages. Is that true?
Yes.
Interesting. Why did you choose that?
Because he's moving between the Arab society and the Jewish society, and so I wanted the name. There are many names actually. There are many Arabs who fake their names also, like as mentioned in the book. Many Rafiq can become Rafi, which is a Jewish, and Muhammad can be Mukhi, and it's easier to survive in the Israeli society.
Apart from the ticket of humor and satire that you use again and again in your story, the names themselves keep telling a story. They promote and they continue the story. And now we are going to please listen to more of the passages that we have prepared. Daniela, please.